Hi everyone, merhaba. I'm very pleased to be here on occasion of the Turkey Innovation Week, and I'd like to thank the Turkish Exporters Assembly for the invitation to speak. My name is Mike KRIEGER. I'm the co-founder and former CTO of Instagram. What I'd like to talk about today are three themes all around the idea of innovation and entrepreneurship. The first is I'll share some of my story coming from São Paulo, Brazil, and then going to Silicon Valley, and reflect on the culture of innovation that I saw in one place versus the other. The second one is talk about the journey of Instagram itself, from a small company of just 2 people to a product used by over 1 billion. And finally, I'll conclude with sharing some ideas around what I think are the most interesting trends in technology today. I was born in São Paulo, Brazil. You can see here that my fashion sense, even from an early age, was very strong, and also that I was fairly geeky, even when I was just in my little kid bathrobes. I was interested in how things worked, be they cars, and at age of 4, my dad brought home our first computer, so I got to start tinkering with it. And even though I wasn't in a place that had necessarily a bunch of technology education, I was able to see how things worked as much as I could. So even in the early days of the web, there was a button that you could click on in your browser that said View Source. And what that let you do is peek behind the curtain and see how things were built. And I spent hours disassembling websites, trying to make some of my own, and trying to educate myself. And the reality is that today there are even more resources available if you're interested in learning technology, be they on YouTube or other education platforms. But when it came time to pick a career, I thought I was going to be a journalist or a writer. You might ask, but you spend all this time messing with websites. Why weren't you going to be an engineer or an entrepreneur? And I think it was the lack of role models. At the time in Brazil, if you wanted to be a technologist, you would probably end up working for the government building tax software, which no criticism of that, but it wasn't what sounded most exciting to me. So when I looked around for role models, I saw writers, I saw thinkers, and I didn't really see entrepreneurs. Now obviously that's changed a lot in the time since then, but that wasn't what I saw as my career. I had the good fortune, though, at 18 to get admitted to Stanford in California. And the primary reason I decided to come to the United States for university was that I didn't have to choose what I was going to have to be at 18 years old. In Brazil, you have to declare your graduate or your degree of study at 18 years old. You have to know what you want to study. You have to know what you want to be. I really didn't. I wanted to be a writer, maybe, but I wasn't sure. Coming to the United States gave me the opportunity to explore a bit further what were my true passions and choose a course of study a little bit later. And early on, I had a life-changing experience. There was a lottery you could enter as a student to have dinner with a famous graduate. And I was selected in one of the first times, and I got to have dinner along with a handful of other students with Jerry Yang. Jerry Yang was an entrepreneur and the co-founder of Yahoo. When I had dinner with him, he was gracious in telling his stories, and I came away with 2 big ideas. The first one is that entrepreneurs aren't aliens that come from another planet, create companies, and then move on. They're people like you and us. They're immigrants, in his case, like I was, and they're just people with an idea who want to make something happen and build something from scratch. The second one is it really lit a fire in me that I wanted to take all that interest that I already had in technology and build something, be an entrepreneur. When it came time to finally choose my degree, I chose this degree called Symbolic Systems. It only exists at Stanford. You might see other degrees sort of similar to it at other universities called Cognitive Science or other degrees. And what I loved about Symbolic Systems, which has had graduates like Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn and Marissa Mayer, who worked at Google and later Yahoo, was the idea that you could bring together 2 fields that at first sound very different but actually have a lot of overlap. The first is understanding how people work and how people think. So we studied psychology and cognitive science and other fields to understand how the brain works. And then we also studied how machines and computers worked, programming languages, artificial intelligence, all these different fields. And the intersection of those 2 is the field of human-computer interaction, which is what I specialized in. This field is all about taking things that are complex, like software, and trying to make them as easy as possible for people to use. As I tried to deepen my studies into startups and entrepreneurship, I joined a program called the Mayfield Fellows Program, which was a 9-month deep dive into entrepreneurship. It's also where I met Kevin. You'll see him later. He's my co-founder at Instagram. In this program, you spent 3 months studying startups through case studies, 3 months at an internship, and then 3 months reflecting on your experience. These sorts of programs that let you not just study entrepreneurship, but experience it firsthand, I think are tremendously valuable. For my internship at the Mayfield Fellows Program, I worked at a startup called Foxmarks. And what I most remember from this experience was my first performance review, which is an experience everybody has gone through. And what I thought was really interesting was my manager, whose name was David Loftusness, sat down with me and said, look, I could sit down and tell you all the things you need to improve, and I can do that. But more importantly, I'm going to tell you the kinds of people you should surround yourself with to complement your strengths and weaknesses. And that idea that you can't go it alone, that you need a team, is one that really stayed with me. After I left Stanford, I had made a master plan. I was going to work first at a 40-person startup and then a 10-person startup, and at that point I believed I'd be ready to start my own company. And the 40-person startup I applied to and got hired at was called Meebo. They were a chat startup where you could chat among ICQ, MSN, AOL, all these different networks, but in your browser. What stood out to me about Meebo, first and foremost, was the technology that they used. They were experts in JavaScript and backend technology, and some of the smartest engineers I'd ever met were working together to deliver this product. The other piece was the very intentional team culture, and very transparent too. Every Friday, our CEO would sit down with the entire company and walk through how much money was left in the bank, what our plan was, and what we should all be thinking about and working on. And he would also share after every single board meeting what the board had shared with him and the leadership and what we were going to do about it. And this open, transparent team culture, very different than maybe a typical corporate structure, gave us the confidence that we were all on the same team and working together. Finally, during this time, I was often going to coffee shops on the weekends, prototyping ideas. Not necessarily big businesses, but projects I thought were interesting. For example, I started building iPhone applications, helping people on their first dates have something to talk about, showing the crime data that San Francisco had opened up, but doing so in an augmented reality way. These projects were all teaching me how to code, how to build, but they also gave me a reason to be in the coffee shop, where I met Kevin, who I'd earlier briefly met during the Mayfield Fellows program. And he was working on a project he called Bourbon. And this is where my life really took a turning point into Instagram. So any entrepreneurial journey, and the Instagram one was a really intense one, I think starts by having the right partner. Kevin and I re-met at the coffee shop, quickly hit it off, and decided soon after that we were going to come together and work on a startup. We're still very close 11 years later. In fact, we still work on projects together. Not every co-founding pair works this way, and I think if I had to reflect on why that is, we both trust each other completely. We've always had each other's backs. And we have very complementary skills. I always joke, neither of us wanted each other's jobs. Kevin started off as CEO, me as CTO, and those are the roles that we kept throughout our journey. Our story doesn't start in a garage, as many startups do, but actually at a Navy pier. We were incubated at a place called Dogpatch Labs on Pier 38 in San Francisco. Picture an old shipping yard, open space, startups working on everything from delivery companies, social networks, and video games. What was valuable about being at an incubator was that when we had a question about technology, for example, should we use Amazon Web Services or something else, often we would just have to say the question out loud and another startup would be happy to chime in. And that kind of collaboration was very helpful when it was just the team of two of us. We were fortunate to raise money from two great teams, Steve Anderson over at Baseline Ventures and Andreessen Horowitz. What was interesting is people often ask, what was your business plan like when you raised money from these people? We actually didn't have one. What we had was a prototype and a couple of early people using the product. What we were working on was a product called Bourbon, B-U-R-B-N. Now, if you remember 2009, people were really interested in this idea of location, checking in. Foursquare, Gowalla, these other startups were starting to grow. And we were interested in that space, but with a twist. Could we also add photos and videos? So instead of just saying, I'm here, you could also show what it was actually like to be there. This was a product we had a couple hundred people using, and those people really liked it. But we struggled to grow it. And we kept wondering, why don't more people use it? And you can kind of tell even from the product screenshots that I'm showing you here, there was a lot in there for an initial product. There was a leaderboard, there was a gamification element, there were plans you could make with your friends, as well as the photos and videos. We started falling into the trap that all too many startups fall into, which is to believe that if you have 10 features and your product isn't taking off, you need to add 10 more. But actually, what's most important is take those 10, take them down to the 3 that really matter, and make them better than anybody else has ever done before. So how do you do that? You do that by asking, what problem are you solving? Not what technology you're using, but what problem can you solve for your customers better than anybody else can? And we sat down and we said, well, people seem to like this photo part of Bourbon. What problems could we solve for them within that? The first one was that photos just didn't look that good. This was the age of the iPhone 3GS, the earliest Android phones were out, and the cameras just weren't very good. So people would experience something beautiful in the world, take a photo of it, look down and say, well, that doesn't really look like what it felt like over there. So that's why we built in filters, to match the emotion of the moment to the look of the photo that you took. Also, uploading was incredibly slow at the time. Cell phone networks were just being developed, and most applications at the time didn't do very smart optimizations around uploading photos to these different services. So we spent lots of time figuring out how to compress the photos and also did some intelligent tricks. For example, you took the photo, you filtered it, and then you added a caption. Other sites waited until you added a caption to start uploading the photo, but we would start uploading as soon as you started entering your caption and you were thinking about what you wanted to say, so that when you were done with that step, we had been doing all the work in the background. And finally, most photos were just stuck on people's camera rolls. We wanted to make it really easy for us to share photos with our friends and other people who might share our interests. So we built a really easy network, a follow button, and we started this network from day one. By focusing on a small number of problems, but doing that really well, we were able to build Instagram with a really small team. We launched Instagram actually just with me and Kevin, soon brought on a couple more engineers and people, but overall our Instagram journey was the story of a small team focusing on problems really tightly and building on from there. And we took a product that in 2010 we launched version 1 to one that reached 1 billion active users less than 10 years later. Now, as we grew, that first question that we would ask in every product decision to every product manager and designer that came our way, what problem are you solving? That was one part of the puzzle. But as we grew, we realized there was another question we needed to ask too, which is which assumptions are we holding on to that we need to start letting go of? And we started realizing that we were no longer our only customers. We built Instagram, the first version, for ourselves and our friends. But as we grew, we started growing in different countries, including Turkey, in Brazil, in Japan. And we started realizing that we needed to build empathy for what these different countries were like and what they were getting out of Instagram. So we built a combination of qualitative and quantitative research. We had data science teams looking really closely at the data, and whenever they spotted an interesting trend, they would get in touch with our user research team, and we would often send teams out to different countries, embed them in the culture, and bring back different findings. I would always send engineers too, so it wasn't just a team coming out and telling the engineers what to build, but engineers experiencing these things from their very own eyes. As an example of this combination, the data science team once flagged an interesting account pattern. There were a couple accounts that were posting hundreds of photos a week and deleting all of them. At first we thought maybe this is some kind of spam attack, something strange is going on. But then our user research team looked into it and actually interviewed some of these accounts, and they found they were actually stores. So people had started using Instagram for e-commerce. A jewelry maker might post a new piece she made, and then once it was sold, well, it's sold. It's time to delete it. That's why they were posting and deleting that much. And that was the kernel of the idea that led us to later build Instagram Shopping. And you also have to realize what are the pieces of your product that you thought were the most important things, but actually were just details of your first version. Instagram started being all square photos that you filtered and you put in a feed that was all ordered by time. But at some point you have to say, well, which of these pieces, this is the very first version of Instagram, are no longer serving us? We realized people wanted to post tall photos and skinny photos too. We realized people also wanted to use things like stories, things like videos, hashtags. So we were able to say which of these pieces are no longer part of the experience. And if you look at the Instagram today, the fundamental building blocks are pretty similar, but a lot of the assumptions that we've dropped along the way. The feed is now personalized to every single person that comes in. We have stories and videos. We no longer use square photos, and actually most photos today on Instagram are no longer filtered because the cameras have improved. You can see this example with Twitter as well. For a long time, I think they held on to the idea that Twitter is Twitter because we limit everybody to 140 characters. And finally, they realized, no, Twitter is Twitter because it's a way of briefly expressing yourself and following people you're interested in, and they eventually relaxed that character limit. And the final piece around innovation at Instagram was around unlocking employee creativity. In older traditional models, all the innovation flows from the top. Somebody has the idea, they tell the world, and then the people go build it at their company. But we realized often the people closest to the problem were the ones that would have the most insights into what we should build next. So every 2 months, everybody at the company, from sales to marketing to engineering to design, would have 2 days to work on anything they wanted within the umbrella of Instagram. This is a photo of our San Francisco office in the middle of one of these hackathons. And from these, often, some projects never went anywhere, but often ideas really led to some kernel that led to a product. So Boomerang, which is a product we launched where you could take short videos and loop them easily, came out of 3 or 4 people during a hackathon having the idea and getting to the prototype, so at the end of 3 days, we said, this is cool, we should put a team around it. Similarly, we built Hyperlapse, which is a video app that we launched that used video stabilization to create these really beautiful time-lapse videos from a 2-day hackathon that even after those 2 days, you could tell that there was something there. So just to summarize at Instagram how we built our culture of innovation, the first one is being maniacally focused on what problems we're solving. You would hear that question every day from us and then our other product leaders. The second one is, as you grow, figuring out which assumptions are still serving you and where is time to let go of some of these older assumptions and move to the next phase. And then finally, finding ways of channeling your employees' creativity so that it's not just you coming up with all the ideas, but sometimes the people working closest on the problems. Finally, I wanted to share a couple of areas of technology that I'm most excited about. I think you'll be hearing from leaders in these areas across all of the Innovation Week. The first is around machine learning and personalization. It's no secret that machine learning is an exciting new area of technology. And the area within it that I'm particularly excited about is the idea of personalization. With Instagram, we were able to take a product that was basically the same for everybody and start making it custom tailored to every single person. And these trends are happening in other places. How we get our news, how we get our medicine, all these different fields where we can combine the power of data to tailor it to every individual. This goes back to that original idea of human-computer interaction. How do we make computers and software most useful to every individual? The second comes at the intersection of digital bits and physical atoms. Rather than see software and hardware or software and industry as two completely different fields, I'm excited about the intersection of the two. As I mentioned, software can be used to build new innovations in healthcare and medicine. Farming, I've seen interesting exhibitions of how computer vision can be used to improve industry and farming and different practices. So I believe the most interesting companies in the future will come from taking these disciplines and bringing them together and creating new products that were previously impossible. And finally, it's no secret as well that this year has been all about changing our work patterns. Even in the last couple of years, as Kevin and I have shifted from working at Instagram to starting to do next companies, but also investing, we've been excited by companies that are rethinking how we collaborate and work. Whether it's Figma, which lets you take photo editing, which used to be in a desktop app, and lets it be collaborative in the browser, or other companies rethinking how employees communicate and innovate together, I think we're just at the beginning. COVID forced a lot of companies to rethink how they work, but I think the changes are still to come even more. COVID forced a lot of companies to rethink how they do their business, but I think the change is just beginning. So my concluding thoughts, hopefully that was a helpful journey around my own entrepreneurship journey, what Silicon Valley provided me. I couldn't have done this alone. So much of my journey and path has been the environment that I've been in. And then also how at Instagram we were trying to channel all that innovation, energy, and entrepreneurship into building a product that people loved. And you might ask how you yourself might be able to participate in this ecosystem, how you could build even more of an entrepreneurial culture in Turkey. Well, a few thoughts. I think there's roles that you can play no matter where you are. For us, it was the coffee shop owner who gave us the space to work long hours while we were building our product, all the way to the investors who took a bet on us in the early stage. So whether it's investing, being an entrepreneur or creator yourself, or an innovator within a company, being a customer and taking a bet on a new startup, even before they've really proven traction, that first customer is so key. Providing mentorships, giving back, it's something I love doing now that we've come out on the other side of the entrepreneurial journey, giving mentorships, doing talks, and beyond, coming up with new ways in which you can boost the ecosystem in Turkey or wherever you are. Thank you so much for your time and hope you have a great Innovation Week.